Viewer discretion advised. The following content contains disturbing real-life accounts of stalking, attempted abduction, and psychological horror. This content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 years of age and for those who are sensitive to fear-inducing material. If you are under 18 or highly sensitive to frightening content, please stop reading and watching now. You have been warned. The Woman at the Door. The summer I turned 22, I made the mistake of agreeing to house-sit for my grandmother while she headed down to Savannah, Georgia, with a group of women from her Sunday congregation. She'd been planning this trip for months, a long weekend filled with historic tours, sweet tea on front porches, and the kind of slow Southern charm that my grandmother absolutely lived for. I was happy to do it. Her house was comfortable, quiet, and I figured it would give me a few days away from my apartment to decompress, sleep in a real bed, and eat actual food from an actual kitchen for once. My grandmother's house is a two-story colonial in a mid-sized suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's the kind of neighborhood where people still wave at each other from their driveways, and the most dramatic thing that usually happens is someone's trash can blowing into the street during a thunderstorm. I'd spent half my childhood sleeping over there. My brother and I used to share the downstairs guest bedroom, which had two twin beds pushed up against opposite walls and a window that faced the front yard. That room always smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, and it was the kind of space that felt completely safe, the way only childhood places can. That first night, I chose the bed closest to the window, the same one I always used as a kid. Before I even thought about sleeping, I did a full walkthrough of the house. Every door, front, back, side entrance through the garage, locked and double-checked. Every ground floor window latched. Wasn't paranoid, I told myself. I was just thorough. It was barely 10 o'clock when I climbed into bed, and I wasn't remotely tired. I lay there scrolling through my phone, texting a couple of friends, watching short videos, doing the whole late-night doom scroll routine that everyone pretends they don't do, but absolutely everyone does. The neighborhood outside was quiet. Crickets, the occasional car passing a few blocks over. Normal. Then, somewhere around 11:30, I heard something that didn't belong. A voice. It was coming from outside, faint at first, like a radio left on in a neighbor's yard. But as I lowered my phone and focused, I could make out what it was saying. One word, repeated at intervals of roughly 10 seconds. Hello? The voice belonged to a woman. That much was clear. But there was something about the quality of it that immediately made my skin prickle. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't the tone you use when you're calling out to someone you know or trying to get the attention of a neighbor. It was flat, almost rhythmic, like she was reciting a word in a language she didn't quite understand. I got out of bed. I moved toward the hallway, pulling the guest bedroom door open slowly. My grandmother's house has a long central hallway that runs from the back bedrooms to the front entrance, and as I inched toward the front door, the voice got clearer. It was definitely coming from outside, definitely coming from the direction of the front porch. Now here's the problem. My grandmother's front door is solid wood with no peephole. Never has had one. She's been meaning to install one for years and has simply never gotten around to it. But the dining room sits just to the right of the front entrance, and its two large windows face directly out onto the front porch and the yard beyond. Those windows have horizontal plastic blinds, the kind you can angle to let in light or block it entirely. I crept into the dining room, moving slowly, barely, breathing. The voice was still going. Hello? Pause. Hello? I reached the window and started carefully tilting one of the blind slats upward, angling it so I could see through without being obvious about it. I was not careful enough. The moment I pressed my eye to the gap between two slats, I saw her. She was standing at the top of my grandmother's porch steps, maybe 8 feet from the front door. A woman. Older, late 50s or early 60s, I'd guess, though something about her face made it hard to pin down an age with any confidence. She wasn't small or frail or any of the things you might picture when you hear older woman. She was sturdy, still, and she was looking directly at the window I was peering through. Not in the direction of the window, not toward the front of the house in general. At the exact slat I was looking through. She smiled when our eyes met, and I want to be precise about this because it matters. It was not a warm smile. It was not a neighborly smile. It was the kind of smile that has no business being on a human face at 11:30 at night when you're standing uninvited on a stranger's porch. It stretched too wide. It stayed too still. And then, holding that smile, she said it again. "Hello?" I stepped back from the window so fast I knocked into one of my grandmother's dining chairs. My heart was slamming. I stood in the middle of that dark dining room and tried to think rationally. Maybe she was one of Grandma's friends. Maybe she didn't know Grandma was out of town. Maybe she was confused or lost, or some combination of normal, innocent things that would make this make sense. But it was almost midnight, and she hadn't knocked. She hadn't rung the doorbell, which works fine. I'd tested it myself. She was just standing there, saying hello into the dark, over and over again. I went back to the guest bedroom and shut the door behind me. With the door closed, I couldn't hear her anymore. I grabbed my phone and started texting. Everyone I could think of, my older sister, my friends from college, 2 people from work. I told them what was happening in rapid-fire fragments. Weird woman outside, front porch, won't knock, just standing there saying hello. Been going on for like 20 minutes. The responses came in quickly, a mix of concern and dark humor. My sister told me to call our grandmother. I looked at the time. My grandmother goes to bed at 9:30. Her cell phone spends most of its time in the bottom of her purse on silent. There was essentially 0 chance of reaching her. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling and listened. Nothing. The voice had stopped. Either she'd left, or she'd moved somewhere I couldn't hear her. My sister was still texting me, telling me to calm down, telling me it was probably nothing. My friends were joking about it now. I was starting to feel slightly foolish for working myself up so much. The silence stretched out. I started to relax. Then the window beside my bed exploded with sound. Not a knock, not a tap, a bang. 3 heavy, deliberate impacts against the glass, so hard I thought for a second it had cracked. I was off the bed and backed against the far wall before I even fully processed what had happened. My nervous system had made the decision for me. Every muscle in my body had locked into high alert. The banging stopped. Silence. Then, hello? That smile, I could hear it in her voice, like she was enjoying this. I don't know what came over me in that moment, some combination of fury and terror and pure adrenaline, but I lunged toward the window, grabbed the blind cord, and yanked it up. She was right there. Her face was inches from the glass. That same horrible smile. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the faint glow from the streetlight at the end of the driveway. We stared at each other through a single pane of glass for what felt like a full 10 seconds, but was probably closer to 2, and then I screamed, my actual voice, loud enough to hurt my own ears. "I'm calling the police right now." I let the blind snap back down and ran. I ran through the hallway, through the living room, up the stairs, and into the upstairs guest room. where I locked the door behind me and shoved the small wooden chair from the writing desk under the handle. Then I crawled under the covers and lay there shaking. I did not call the police. I don't have a clean explanation for that. Part of me thought maybe I'd misread the situation. Part of me didn't want to be the person who caused a scene over what might turn out to be a confused neighbor. Part of me was just scared in a way that made it hard to do anything useful. So I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, and I waited. Hours passed. 2, maybe 2.5. I didn't sleep. At some point the fear settled into a dull, exhausted numbness, and I finally made myself get up and check the house. I went to every window on both floors and looked out. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The street was empty and still and lit by the pale glow of the neighborhood lamps, and there was no sign of anyone anywhere. She was gone. The next morning I called my grandmother before she'd even had breakfast at the hotel. She picked up on the second ring, which was unusual for her, and when I told her what had happened, she didn't do what I expected. She didn't dismiss it. She didn't tell me I was being dramatic. She started yelling. Not at me, just into the phone. A burst of alarmed, panicked sound that made me hold the phone away from my ear. When she calmed down enough to speak clearly, she told me something that made the hair on my arms stand up. She said that 3 days before she left for Savannah, she'd been at the Kroger 2 miles from her house. She was doing her weekly shopping, moving through the produce section, when she noticed a woman watching her, not glancing at her, not making brief eye contact the way strangers do, watching her, openly, steadily, for a long time. The woman was smiling. My grandmother said she moved to a different aisle. The woman followed. She moved again. The woman kept pace with her for nearly 15 minutes, maintaining that same unnerving distance, that same fixed smile, never approaching, never speaking, just watching. My grandmother eventually left her cart in the middle of an aisle and walked straight out to her car. She hadn't told anyone because she didn't want to seem like she was overreacting. I asked her to describe the woman. She said mid-50s, heavy-set, with dark hair that was starting to go gray at the temples. I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought about the woman on the porch, the smile that didn't move, the eyes that found the exact slat I was looking through before I'd even made a sound. I still don't know if it was the same person. My grandmother is 73 years old, and her memory isn't what it once was, and I know that I have to account for that, but the way she reacted when I told her my story, the speed of it, the sheer alarm, wasn't the reaction of someone confusing things. It was the reaction of someone who recognized something. I've thought about it a lot since then. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure I want one. The man in the car. My name is Jake. I'm a junior now at Ohio State, Columbus campus, but this happened during my freshman year, about 8 months after I moved into the dorms. I'd just gotten out of my first real relationship, which lasted about 6 weeks before imploding spectacularly in the way only college relationships can. I was doing fine, genuinely, but I was also 20 years old and lonely in the specific way that you can only be lonely in a city full of people your own age, so I did what everyone does. I downloaded a dating app. The one I was using at the time had a feature where you could match with people who attended your same school, which seemed reassuring somehow, like there was a layer of accountability built in. I'd been on it for maybe 2 weeks when I matched with a girl named Amber. Her profile photos showed a dark-haired girl with a wide smile and an armful of books. She mentioned she was a lit major, that she loved old bookstores and movie theaters that still showed classic films, and that her sense of humor was best described as aggressively dry. We talked for almost a week before I suggested meeting up. She said yes immediately. She asked if I'd be okay meeting at a specific parking lot near the edge of campus. There was a theater 2 blocks from there, she explained, and she'd pick me up so we could drive together. She said her car had a good sound system and she'd made a playlist. It seemed perfectly normal. I said, sure. I want to pause here and say, I know. In retrospect, I know exactly where the red flags were. But you have to understand that at the time, everything felt ordinary. We'd been talking for days. She seemed real. She seemed funny and smart and completely like a normal person. I had no reason to be suspicious. So at 9:15 on a Friday night, I walked to the parking lot she'd specified and waited. It was a quiet stretch of campus-adjacent street, residential on both sides, well lit enough, the kind of block where you'd see students walking home from the library at all hours. I didn't feel unsafe. I stood on the corner she'd told me and waited, and about 4 minutes later a car came around the bend at the far end of the street and started moving toward me. It wasn't a new car, dark-colored, maybe dark blue or charcoal, hard to tell under the streetlights. It slowed as it approached me, then stopped directly in front of where I was standing. The driver's window rolled down. The person behind the wheel was not Amber. He was a man, somewhere between 55 and 65, with close-cropped gray hair and a thick build. He was wearing a collared shirt. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you already know who they are. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. I said yes. "You waiting on Amber?" The way my stomach dropped in that moment is hard to describe. Not the slow, sinking feeling you get when something goes mildly wrong, the sharp, vertiginous drop of something going very wrong very fast. I said, "Yeah, how did he know that?" He said he was Amber's father. He said she'd asked him to come get me and bring me to her. He said he'd wanted to meet me in person before letting his daughter go out with some guy she'd met online. I looked at him. I thought about that for about 3 seconds. Then I said, very calmly, "Why wasn't I told you'd be coming instead of her?" He repeated the part about wanting to meet me first. Protective father thing. Completely reasonable, right? He even nodded while he said it, like the nodding would make it more convincing. I looked at him one more time. He had the engine, running. His hands were on the wheel. "I'm good," I said, and I turned around and started walking in the opposite direction. He called after me, "Hey, hey!" Not angry yet, surprised almost, like he genuinely couldn't believe I wasn't getting in the car. I didn't respond. I kept walking, and I heard his car creeping forward, and I turned just enough to make sure he wasn't doing a U-turn to follow me. He drove straight. I watched him turn left at the far intersection and disappear. I breathed. I kept walking. I pulled out my phone and opened the app to message Amber, then stopped. What was I going to say? I looked at our conversation. I scrolled back through it. Something felt different now, reading it with different eyes. The way she'd steered me toward that specific corner, the way she'd asked me to share my location with her, just so I know where to find you, which I had done without thinking twice about it. The questions she'd asked about my dorm building, my schedule, whether I had a roommate. I put my phone in my pocket without messaging her. I was maybe 2/3 of the way back to campus when I passed a side street and noticed a car parked at the curb with its headlights off. Dark blue or charcoal, the same one. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look directly at it. I kept my pace exactly the same. I'd read somewhere that sudden changes in speed or direction signal awareness, and I didn't want him to know I'd seen him. I pulled out my phone like I was checking something, kept walking. When I reached the next intersection, I turned right, stepped behind a large utility van parked at the curb, and stopped dead. Silence. I pressed my back against the van and listened. Footsteps. Not from the direction of the car, from behind me, soft, deliberate, getting closer. I heard the specific sound of a shoe scuffing over a loose piece of asphalt, and I knew with complete certainty that I was being followed on foot. I had my location still shared with Amber, or whoever was using that account. The footsteps were a few cars away, getting closer. I looked around the far end of the van and I saw him, the same man, moving between two parked cars across the street, scanning. He hadn't seen me yet. He called out something I couldn't fully make out. Something like, "Come on back. She's waiting." But his voice had changed. The reasonable, patient tone from before was gone. He looked to be in decent shape for his age, but I was 20 and had been running track since high school. I ran. I went flat out, cutting through a parking lot, vaulting a low concrete barrier, hitting the main campus path at full speed. I didn't look back for the first 2 blocks. When I finally did, the path behind me was empty. I made it back to my dorm building, swiped my card, took the stairs to the 4th floor, and locked myself in my room. My roommate was out. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for my breathing to slow down. My phone buzzed. A text from the number associated with Amber. I opened it. "You little piece of trash. You think you're smart? I know what building you're in. I would have made sure you never talk to anyone again." I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot and blocked the number. I still have that screenshot. I've never deleted it. I've gone back and forth about going to the police. I went once, actually, showed them the messages, but without a license plate number or a clear photo, there wasn't much they said they could do. The case is technically still open. I don't know if anything will ever come of it. What I do know is that I've never shared my location with someone I haven't met in person since that night. And I never will again. The thing in the basement. When I was 18, I had a part-time job that I absolutely loved and absolutely should not have been given this much unsupervised access to. I was a summer janitor at my old high school in a mid-sized town in rural Michigan. The gig was simple. During summer break, the school did a full deep clean, waxing floors, cleaning out storage areas, repainting locker rooms, that kind of thing. There were usually 5 or 6 of us on the crew, plus a supervisor named Ray, who'd been maintaining the building for something like 22 years. Ray was a decent guy, quiet, reliable, never gave me a hard time about anything. The older guys on the crew were the same way, mostly people who'd been doing this kind of work for years and weren't interested in making it dramatic. I worked days sometimes, evenings other times, and occasionally nights, anywhere from 9 in the morning to midnight, depending on what the school needed and how much money I needed that week. The pay was decent for a teenager, and the freedom was excellent. When Ray trusted you enough to leave you to finish up alone, you could basically do half an hour of real work and then spend the rest of the shift on your phone until it was time to lock up. I am not proud of this. I am simply reporting facts. The night everything changed, Ray had to leave early. Some family thing. He didn't go into detail. He told me what still needed to be done, showed me how to set the alarm, handed me the master key, told me to text him when I was done. Standard stuff. He left at around 9:30, and I had maybe 2 hours of legitimate work ahead of me before I could lock up and go home. The main task he'd left me was clearing the gymnasium after an end-of-summer assembly. The school board had held some kind of program that afternoon, and the bleachers and portable chairs had been pulled out for the event. The bleachers retracted easily enough, built-in mechanical system. But the portable chairs, which were the kind that stacked together in groups of 6, had to be carried down to the basement storage room manually. The basement of that school is not a pleasant place. I want to be clear about this because it matters for what comes next. It's not the finished, carpeted kind of basement you might have in a house. It's the industrial kind, Bare concrete floors, exposed pipes on the ceiling, rows of metal shelving units filled with school supplies, old sports equipment, cleaning materials, and all the miscellaneous accumulated junk that a building picks up over decades. The lighting down there is exactly as bad as you're imagining. A handful of fluorescent tubes in the ceiling, only some of which work at any given time, throwing uneven pools of light into an otherwise dim space. One section of the basement was used for art storage: easels, canvas rolls, boxes of paint and brushes, and a collection of those full-body artists' mannequins, the articulated wooden ones that you pose for figure drawing. There were maybe a dozen of them in various states of disassembly, and they were all covered with old paint-spattered drop cloths. From a distance, in bad lighting, they looked uncomfortably like people crouching under bed sheets. I carried my first stack of 6 chairs down the basement stairs, made my way to the chair storage section in the back, set them down, and went back up for more. On my second trip down, I noticed something immediately. One of the mannequins, one of the front ones, closest to the stairs, the one that I had definitely walked past 2 minutes ago, was no longer covered. The drop cloth had been removed and was sitting in a pile on the floor beside it. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I stood very still and looked at the uncovered mannequin for a long moment. I set down the chairs. I took out my phone and texted Ray. "Hey, weird question. Is there any chance someone else is in the building right now?" He replied after about 30 seconds. "No. Why?" I told him about the mannequin, about the drop cloth. His response took longer this time. Then, "That's strange. No one should be there. Keep an eye out. Helpful." "Thanks, Ray." I gathered myself and started walking toward the chair storage area in the back. To get there, I had to pass through the art storage section, and as I moved deeper into the basement, I saw something that stopped me cold. In the far corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the nearest working light, in a zone of shadow that the fluorescence couldn't quite penetrate, there was a drop cloth on the floor, separate from the others, not draped over a mannequin, just folded, kind of, in a loose pile on the ground, moving, not dramatically, not flailing or writhing, just shifting slightly, in the way that a person trying very hard to stay still inevitably shifts. The subtle rise and fall of controlled breathing, the occasional micro-adjustment of weight. There was someone under that drop cloth. I did not approach it. I turned around, walked back to the stairs at a pace that I would describe as controlled but urgent, went up, shut the basement door, and locked it from the outside with the master key. My hands were not entirely steady when I did this. I texted Ray again. "Someone is hiding under one of the drop cloths in the basement." I locked the door. "Please come back." His response, "Are you sure?" Me. "Yes." Ray. "Call the police." Me. "Can you just come back?" "You left 10 minutes ago." A pause. Then, "I can't come back tonight. Call the police or confront whoever it is. You have the building." I stared at my phone. I did not want to call the police. I was 18 and male and apparently constitutionally incapable of admitting I was scared, which is extremely stupid but also extremely 18. I also didn't want to confront a person who was hiding in a basement for reasons I couldn't begin to guess. So I did the thing that made the least sense, which was to unlock the basement door and go back down anyway. The drop cloth in the corner was flat on the floor. Whoever had been under it was gone. I stood in the middle of the storage room and looked around. All the mannequins were covered again. The one that had been exposed earlier now had its drop cloth back over it as neatly as any of the others. The room was silent. I could see into most of it from where I stood, and there was no one visible anywhere. I turned to leave. That's when I heard the first thump. It came from above me, from the ceiling. A single heavy impact, like something dropped. Then a second, then a third, and by the third one it had resolved into a rhythm, a slow, methodical banging, moving along the ceiling from one side of the room toward the other. I looked up. The basement ceiling has a series of large, rectangular air vents, the kind that are about 2 feet wide and run between the rooms of the building, part of the old HVAC system that heats and cools the school. The covers are thin metal panels secured with screws that, in a building this old, are not exactly in pristine condition. Someone was crawling through the vent system. I could see it, the slight downward bowing of the vent panels as weight moved across them, the rhythmic metallic percussion of each movement. Whatever, whoever, was in there was moving deliberately, not panicking, not scrambling, moving with purpose. And then they stopped, directly above me. I stood there and looked up at the ceiling. I could hear nothing for a moment. Then a single sound, 2 slow, heavy bangs on the underside of the vent panel directly above my head, like a knock, like a hello. Then silence. I have never left a building faster in my life. I went up the stairs, set the alarm without stopping to think about whether I'd completed any of my remaining tasks, locked the front entrance, and did not stop moving until I was in my car with the doors locked and the engine running. I called Ray from the parking lot and told him a version of the truth, that I'd heard sounds I couldn't explain, got spooked, and locked up early. I didn't mention the moving drop cloth. I didn't mention standing directly under a vent while someone inside it knocked on the panel above my head. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud would have made it real in a way I wasn't ready to deal with. That was my last week at the job anyway. I collected my final paycheck, turned in the master key, and never went back. I've thought about that night many times in the years since, about what that person was doing in the school, about why they were hiding, about whether they were watching me the whole time I was down there, from under the cloth, from inside the vents, tracking my movements through the dim and flickering light of that basement, about what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I still don't have answers to any of those questions. I'm not entirely sure I want them. What they all had in common. I've been collecting stories like these for a long time, not as a hobby exactly, more as a compulsion. Once you've had one experience that genuinely, viscerally terrifies you, you start paying attention to other people's accounts in a different way. You start looking for the patterns. And there are patterns. The woman on my grandmother's porch, the man in the dark car, the person in the basement vents. None of these people did anything overtly violent. None of them physically harmed anyone. And in each case, the person experiencing the event had a moment, sometimes several moments, where they talked themselves down, rationalized what they were seeing, decided there was probably a normal explanation. This is the pattern. This is the thing that connects almost every account of a near miss, a close call, a situation that could have gone catastrophically wrong, but somehow didn't. Not luck, or not luck alone. What saved people in these situations again and again was the moment when they stopped rationalizing and started listening to the part of their brain that was screaming at them. The guy who didn't get in the stranger's car, the girl who ran instead of waiting, the janitor who finally locked the door and left. We spend so much energy on politeness, on not wanting to seem paranoid, on not wanting to make a scene, on giving people the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes that's the right call. Most of the time, actually, the weird thing you noticed is nothing. The person who gave you a funny look had a headache. The car that seemed to follow you turned onto its own street. But sometimes it isn't nothing, and the stories that don't end well are almost always the ones where someone talked themselves out of that feeling one too many times. Let me share a few more accounts that were sent to me by readers. These are short, but they're some of the most unsettling I've received. Kayla's story. Nashville, Tennessee. I work the closing shift at a grocery store. It's usually fine. There's a whole crew of us, and we're out by midnight. One night last October, I was doing a final sweep of the parking lot and noticed a car parked at the far end with someone sitting in it. Just sitting. Engine off, lights off. I figured they were on their phone or waiting for someone. An hour later, when I came back through to finish locking up, the car was still there, still dark, still someone in the driver's seat. I went back inside and told my manager. He went out to check. The car was empty, no one inside. To this day, we have no idea when or how the person left. The lot has cameras, and our manager reviewed the footage. You can see the figure in the car at the beginning, and then, in one frame, they're gone. No door opens. No one walks away. They're just there, and then they're not. We've never been able to explain it. Marcus's story, Portland, Oregon. In 2019, I was living in a ground-floor apartment in a converted Victorian house. 3 units, nice neighborhood, generally felt safe. I started noticing that someone had been rearranging things on my back patio. Not dramatically, just small stuff. A potted plant moved 6 inches to the left. A chair turned to face a different direction. I assumed it was the neighbor upstairs coming down to use the outdoor space which we shared, and just moving things when she needed to. I didn't say anything. Then one night I couldn't sleep and went to the kitchen for water, and I saw something through the patio door that made my blood go cold. A flashlight beam moving slowly across the back fence. Steady, methodical, like whoever was holding it was examining the fence, looking for something. I called 911. The officers found no one in the yard, but they found boot prints in the soft soil along the back fence. Multiple sets. Recent. Whoever had been visiting my patio had been doing it for a while, and they'd been careful. I moved 2 months later. I've never lived on a ground floor since. Devon's story, Atlanta, Georgia. This one is short because it doesn't have an explanation, and I've given up trying to find one. I used to drive a long stretch of interstate for work, early mornings, before sunup, empty roads, no traffic, just me and the semi-trucks and the radio. One morning, I noticed a car behind me. Nothing unusual. It pulled onto the on-ramp behind me and settled into the lane. But it stayed exactly 1 car length behind me for 43 miles without once varying its distance. Not 1 car length closer, not 1 car length farther. Exactly the same distance for 43 miles. When I took my exit, the car took the same exit. When I turned into my company's parking lot, I looked in the rear view. The car had stopped at the entrance to the lot, just sitting there. I couldn't see the driver. I sat in my car for 15 minutes waiting to see what would happen. When I finally looked up again, the car was gone. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if they ever followed me again, because after that morning I started varying my routes and my departure times. Nothing like that happened again. But I still check my mirrors more than I used to. A lot more. There's something that all of these accounts share, and it's not the supernatural, and it's not the inexplicable. It's simpler than that. It's the feeling, specific, physical, undeniable, that something is wrong. Before the logical mind catches up, before you've even consciously registered the details that are triggering it. Security professionals call it pre-attack indicators. Behavioral psychologists call it implicit threat detection. Most of us just call it a gut feeling. Your body knows things before your brain does. This is not mysticism, it's neuroscience. The limbic system, the part of your brain that handles threat response, processes sensory information faster than the cortex processes language. You feel danger before you can explain why you feel it. The problem is that we've been socialized, most of us, to override it, to check it against our rational assessment of the situation, to ask ourselves whether we're being paranoid, whether we're being fair, whether we're making assumptions. And in the vast majority of cases, this is appropriate and correct and keeps us from being horrible, suspicious, unfair people. But there's a version of that, a subtle, insidious version, where the same instinct that protects us from being unfair also prevents us from protecting ourselves. The people in these stories, the ones who made it out, they all had the same moment. The moment where they stopped asking, "Am I overreacting?" and started asking, "What do I do right now?" The woman at the window who decided she was done waiting it out and ran upstairs. The college kid who turned and walked away from the car without getting in. The teenager who went up the basement stairs and locked the door behind him. None of them were certain. None of them had proof. They just decided that being wrong about the danger was a better outcome than being right about it and not having moved. Here's what I want you to take from these stories. Not fear, or not only fear, which is easy enough to find on the internet. What I want you to take is this: trust the feeling, the one that wakes up before your brain does, the one that makes your chest tighten when the logical part of you hasn't yet figured out why. It has kept people alive for a very long time, and it is still worth listening to. The world is full of unexplained things. Most of them are nothing, but some of them are something, and the cost of treating a something like a nothing is much higher than the cost of treating a nothing like a something. Be careful out there. Be smart. And check your mirrors more than you used to.